this video, we're going to take our concepts of consumer and producer surplus, put them together to talk about the efficiency of a market. And so we're going to start off with the concept of a competitive market. That's always our kind of our baseline that we start with, and then we'll compare other scenarios throughout the semester, throughout this course, to competitive markets. So two ways you can think about what is it that makes a market efficient. Well, one way to think about it is that the market is efficient if the marginal cost of the last unit produced equals the marginal benefit. Second way to think about it is that a market is efficient if we maximize the total surplus in the market. And what do we mean by the total surplus? Well, the total surplus is the sum of the consumer and producer surplus. Later on, we're going to expand that concept a little bit to include things like government revenue. Okay? So that right now we don't have the government as an actor in the market actively participating, say, through taxes, but later on when we look at, say, taxation, right, the government is going to collect revenue, and so they'll be taking some of that surplus and using it for whatever activities they decide to use that tax revenue. But for now, a total surplus is simply the sum of the consumer and producer surplus in the market. So what we can show is that actually these two different ways of thinking about market efficiency, they mean the same thing. So let's take our market for chai tea. And now, but instead of just our Heavenly Tea, our one seller, one producer, and our 4 consumers from the previous examples, we have the whole market for chai tea here. So here's our demand curve. Here is our supply curve. And let's say that the equilibrium, and remember, equilibrium is where two curves intersect. Let's say that takes place at $2 and 15,000 chai lattes, say per month or week or whatever our time frame is. Now, that would be where the market, we say that's the equilibrium. Of course, one question we ask is, well, why? Why is that the market equilibrium? Well, imagine if instead we only sold 14,000 chai lattes. And notice I'm not drawing this to scale on the x-axis, just making it so it's easier to illustrate. Well, what would be true at that 14,000th chai latte, right? That marginal chai latte, that very last one. Let's say that at that price, right, there's some consumer, right, being represented here on this demand curve. Okay? And that's the way you want to think about this, our demand curves, is the demand curve is representing the willingness to pay or the marginal benefit of some consumer in the market who's buying that particular, in this case, chai latte. Okay? And so let's say that for whoever this is, they're willing to pay $2.20. Now, there's some seller out there, it could be Starbucks, it could be Heavenly Tea, it could be whoever. Let's say that they were willing to supply that chai latte at $1.80. So, well, what would be true then if we stopped here? And let's say that, you know, it doesn't actually matter what the price is ultimately for this example, but let's say the price was $2, but for some reason we stopped at 14,000. Well, then our total surplus, think about consumer surplus, would be the area below the demand curve, down to the price, and out to the 14,000. So we'd be missing this triangle in here. We'd be missing out on that. In terms of producer surplus, likewise, we'd be missing out on all of this surplus here. Well, why is that? Well, if you look, for these 1,000 lattes, between 14 and 15,000, consumers are willing to pay more than the cost of producing those chai lattes. So it would be beneficial for the consumers and the producers to get together and make those exchanges. So stopping short of 14,000 means that we're giving up additional consumer and producer surplus that we could generate in this market. Why is that happening? It's happening because marginal benefit is exceeding marginal cost. Right? That's the way you want to look at this. Right? The marginal benefit of the 14,000th latte is $2.20, whereas the marginal cost is only $1.80. Right? There's a 40-cent gain there, a difference, right? A surplus that could accrue to both the seller and to the buyer in this case. And so the market should keep producing up until that 15,000th latte, which is just where that willingness to pay or marginal benefit is just equal to the marginal cost. You get the same thing. What if you went too far the other direction? Say we go out to 16,000, and just to keep it simple, well, use the same numbers, except now the $1.80 represents the marginal benefit, and the $2.20 represents the marginal cost of the 16,000th latte. Well, what's happening here? Well, we should never be producing those lattes because it costs more to produce those lattes than consumers are willing to pay for them. So think about it. If firms were actually supplying 16,000 lattes, the only way they'd be able to or be willing to do this is if the price was up at $2.20. But at that price, only 14,000 consumers would be willing to buy lattes, or consumers would be willing to buy 14,000 total lattes, chai lattes. So that wouldn't occur, right? Our equilibrium is always where marginal cost equals marginal benefit. And in the end, we end up with the fact that that's also where we maximize the total surplus. So we'll shade in this upper triangle here that we're outlining is our consumer surplus. And this lower triangle is our producer surplus. Again, if you stop short of 15,000, well, that means you're just not taking advantage of all of the surplus that could be generated in the market. If you produce too much, well, you're going to have a hard time, first off, selling all those units, because if you put the price up at $2.20 in order to encourage firms to supply that much, consumers aren't even going to be willing to buy that many units. Right? So you'll end up with a surplus or an excess supply. Firms will have to drop the price down in order to sell those extra 2,000 lattes. So that is our basic concept of economic efficiency in a competitive market. Next, we're going to take a look at what happens with different kinds of government interventions, starting with price floors and price ceilings.